This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. All this may mean something.
I've been coerced into watching tonight's movie.
You do have books in the 24th century.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. We haven't run out of history quite yet.
Hello and welcome to Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture and how Star Trek relates to it. I'm Duncan Barrett and today I'm joined by Lee Hutchison. Hi Lee, how are you doing?
Yeah, really good. This is I feel like I've talked about every Star Trek show ever before on different podcasts or various platforms, but I think this is the first time I've ever got to talk about Strange New Worlds. So yeah, I'm excited to test that muscle.
Absolutely. This is our first time talking about Strange New Worlds on Primitive Culture. And I think the first time we've ever talked about a show that hasn't even been, I was going to say broadcast, streamed, downloaded, whatever, released yet. Though I think to keep us on the right side of Paramount, CBS and so on, I'm not going to put this out, obviously, until the episode has gone out. But yeah, this is kind of hot off the press, really. But this was an episode that you and I both saw in the last few days, last week or so, I think. And I just thought, wow, this has got to be a Primitive Culture episode because the reference points, the inspiration is kind of really staring you in the face with this one. But in a way that I think works very well on the whole.
Yeah, there's definitely some really subtle nods to a certain franchise that we're going to discuss, and some that are perhaps very much on the nose as well.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, the most obvious one, which is, well, let's come up and say it. Anyone who, just for the sake of any listeners who aren't up to date with Strange New Worlds, actually, which might include listeners in the UK, we're going to be talking about episode 9 of season 1. So if you haven't seen that episode or don't know anything about it or don't want to know anything about it or don't want to be spoiled about what happens right at the end of it, don't listen to this podcast, okay? Because we're going to assume that you've seen it. But yeah, the chest burster moment was the one where I was like, wow, okay, they really went there. But I think you're right, actually, in various ways, the Alien franchise and actually various other kind of 80s, 90s movie franchises work their way into this episode. It's very much, I was watching it again today and thinking there's a reason I love this episode so much. It touches an awful lot of those buttons for me, for the kind of movies that I watched growing up.
Yeah, I think one of these ones, I think when you get into sort of primitive culture, that you can talk about that kind of the surface level stuff, but when I rewatched the episode again today, it felt like there was quite a lot of the structure of some of the various Alien kind of movies that we're going to talk about, and then perhaps there's other things when you almost think on a wider perspective about the influence of that franchise on Star Trek, and actually maybe sort of vice versa as well. I think, yeah, there's definitely quite a few things going on.
Well, we've talked about Alien, I think, on Primitive Culture at least once, possibly twice, because I think Tony and I talked about it in relation to the Voyager episode Macrocosm. I guess we were thinking more about Aliens maybe there, where Janeway gets her guns out in more ways than one and kind of goes all kind of macho Ripley kind of action hero. And then I talked about it with Dr. Chris Nunn when we were looking at films that inspired Star Trek First Contact, because I think, unless I'm misremembering, I'm pretty sure Alien was one of the ones that Jonathan Frakes screened to the crew when they were prepping that film.
Yeah, I think that was Aliens for sure. I think a bit of Alien in terms of maybe sort of like the production design elements in terms of like H.R. Geiger. I know that played a role almost in some of the Borg design in TNG, you know, that mix of like mechanical, organic, but then I think with there's perhaps more the Aliens design about sort of the kind of the military types, even sort of going and involving a kind of queen on top of it.
Yeah, I was struck by that actually, thinking about Aliens, and I don't think I'd ever quite made that connection before, but absolutely what they did with Star Trek First Contact of like reinventing the Borg, is very much what they do in Aliens with the xenomorphs, reinventing them, giving them this queen that kind of changes everything that we know about them and their whole, remarkably complex breeding arrangements. But the other thing that struck me actually was I remember years ago you recorded an episode of Earl Grey talking about aliens and the ways in which that influenced Next Generation, which I'd kind of forgotten all about until I was taking another look at it today. And I thought, oh yeah, there are a few of those seeds there. And there's definitely, I think, there's a kind of trajectory from the character in Aliens, whose name I can't think of. What was that? Vasquez, right. Yeah, of course, Vasquez, like the Vasquez rocks. Through to Tasha Yar, through to La'an in Strange New Worlds. Because it watching this episode, All Those Who Wander, it did strike me that La'an has a lot of Tasha in her, I think. In a weird, and weirdly, this episode has a kind of Tasha inflection because, here's the big spoiler, they kill off what appeared to be one of the main characters, very much in the way that Tasha is killed off, towards the end of season 1 of Next Gen. And there was this whole thing then, wasn't there, of, oh, no one's safe, this show could be really bold, and a couple of years later, are they going to kill off Patrick Stewart and Riker's going to be the captain or whatever? Of course, they never do that. Everyone is, like, super safe on that show. Nothing all that bad ever does happen to any of the main characters apart from Tasha. And Strange New Worlds, weirdly, is in this situation where the majority of their cast are like canon shielded, basically. So we know what happens to Pike. We know Mbenga's going to be around. We know that Spock's all right. We know that Uhura's going to be fine. We know that Chapel's going to be fine. So they have got a bit of a problem in terms of peril. They can't go the whole, Game of Thrones or, I don't know, one of these shows that likes to, The Walking Dead, likes to kill off characters to kind of tug on the heartstrings. They've only got, I think, they've got Una, they've got Ortegas, and they've got La'an. Those are the only three left now, I think, that could potentially meet a sticky end. Even, poor old Sam Kirk, we know what's going to happen to him as kind of an ignominious end as it might be.
Yeah, I think there's one thing I should also kind of mention as well. Data kind of took heavily inspirations that I remember. I always tried with Earl Grey to try and do almost a little bit of sort of primitive culture, like tie into to kind of popular culture and the wider implications. And when they were sort of, I'm always fascinated when you can get a list of these like directors or filmmakers that go, what we want to do is we want to make, here's a list of films that we want to maybe sort of inspire the kind of work that we're going to do, or the tone or the visual style. I know Christopher Nolan is a huge fan of doing that, but Gene Roddenberry did a little bit of that before Next Generation. And there was films like Alien, Aliens, Blade Runner. I think you can almost see that line between sort of Bishop, in terms of this kind of very friendly, affable android and kind of a sort of military kind of style complex, and how he goes there. So you can almost see that line from Data to there as well. So another alien connection. But I think, almost just on that point as well, I found it when I did a bit of research as well about kind of Ridley Scott. And I think there was talk at the time, this is just off the top of my head, but I think they had this big wish list for First Contact, like who could we get? Alongside the Tom Hanks for starring as Ephraim Cochrane.
Oh yeah.
I think there was some hope that they would get Ridley Scott, but wow. I didn't realise he was a bit of a fan as well. And I read an article with him where he did an interview with Denick Geek in 2017 where he was like, I never realised that the awakening of science fiction universe over many films would get so large. You can't thank Star Wars for that. You can thank, God bless them, Star Trek. You've got all that. It's evolved from and made another form of entertainment as well. So definitely a big Star Trek fan as well.
Gosh, imagine if they'd got him to make Nemesis instead of Stuart Baird. That would have been that would have been a happy timeline, I think. I feel like he could probably have not to say that the film wouldn't have had its, I don't want to get diverted into a discussion about the merits or not of Nemesis, but like that is amazing to know that there's someone of his caliber out there who could conceivably be interested in a Star Trek film. I think I'd rather have a Star Trek by Ridley Scott than a Star Trek by Tarantino right now, personally. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, he is one of the masters of the genre, and I suppose, was it Noah Hawley that was meant to be doing sort of the Star Trek 14 movie? Now he's making the Alien TV show produced by Ridley Scott. Yeah. So that's well in development for coming to, I think, the Disney Plus streaming platform in the future, so Hulu in America. So yeah, that'll be interesting to see what they gain from Star Trek's loss.
Yeah, it was a weird one. When I went to go and have another look at the Alien movies, I was thinking, where can I stream these? They're not on Netflix. And I was sort of going through my streaming apps, and I realised, okay, they're on Disney. That's
the Alien Queen kind of
weird,
Disney
loading up the Disney Plus app. Yeah, exactly, for this. But okay. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about this episode, All Those Who Wander. First of all, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on the title? Because this is a reference, I think, to Tolkien, isn't it? And I so far, I've seen it twice, I'm not identifying any particular link between the title and the episode, but I'm curious whether that jumped out at you.
This feels like a throwback to some earlier podcast discussions as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, I never kind of realised the Tolkien connection. You could maybe kind of maybe tie into sort of Uhura's conversation at the start, you know, perhaps about sort of like, you know, for people, like they come to the Enterprise, it's their absolute dream, as we've heard many a time over many different series, and perhaps that for her, she's someone that's just wandering through her career, and obviously there's a certain comment at the end of the episode that perhaps maybe grounds her in sort of viewing the Enterprise as that kind of career goal. So perhaps it maybe relates to her, because it feels like it sets up in the kind of pre-title sequence to be maybe an episode about Uhura and something like that, and then we kind of get something much more different.
Yes, that's interesting. That makes a lot of sense. I don't know why I hadn't thought about that. I suppose I was thinking it's got to be something to do with the A plot, but you're right. I think it's a title for the B plot, maybe. And in a way, it doesn't tip their hand. I mean, I'm curious. I guess people watching these episodes as they go out, they get a little teaser and they get stills and stuff, so they do get some kind of idea of what's coming. One of the things I quite enjoy about getting them early is you put an episode on, you literally have no idea what you're going to get. And that's why this one was such a shock for me, and also a kind of pleasant surprise when they went into full-on alien mode. I was like, wow, okay, Star Trek's doing this. And they go quite gruesome. I mean, like they find a severed arm, there's a guy with no leg and a pool of blood where his leg should be. I mean, like, by Star Trek standards, this goes pretty dark, I'd say, and quite scary, actually.
Yeah, it's definitely a very violent episode, and I suppose it's kind of... It almost reminds you almost of like the Jem'Hadar episode. Obviously, we've seen a little bit of the Gorn already in this season, and you know it was quite a bloody and violent encounter. And again, with this one, it's like if you're going to introduce someone and you want them to be a threat, you know, you have to kind of draw blood, and you know they certainly make some creative choices as well, which highlights the threat of the Gorn, which clearly. At this early stage, I think if I'd gone into Strange New Worlds, I would expect maybe the focus to be on maybe the Klingons in this sort of post-war era. You know, I've been very surprised in the first 10 episodes that's not been the case whatsoever, but the Gorn seem to be becoming a bit more prevalent, and often you get it where these Star Trek shows pick up maybe an alien species from some of the previous shows and then sort of runs with them, like Deep Space Nine taking the Bajorans and the Cardassians, going with it, Next Generation really bringing out sort of the Klingons, Enterprise really the Vulcans and Andorians, and it seems like with this it's going to be the Gorn to an extent.
Yeah, and I think it works really well, actually. I mean, I did sort of wonder watching this, you know, how do we reconcile these Gorn with the Gorn that Kirk fought in the original series, and not just on the level of like special effects and rubber suits and so on, but you know these guys seem a lot scarier somehow, a lot more formidable, and also you know that weird Gorn we saw in Enterprise. I don't know, like, and in Lower Decks we got a Gorn wedding at one point, and the Gorn seem to have become kind of cuddly, like you know usually happens with the enemy species in Star Trek, but. This definitely took them in a very different direction, I would say. And they'd set it up, of course, with the previous episode, Memento Mori, which was another great... I think these are probably my two favourites of the season, actually. These two La'an/Gorn episodes. They really reinvent this species, I suppose, as a villain in their own mold. You know, they're doing something very different with them, and particularly in this second episode by leaning so heavily on the Alien franchise and basically saying, okay, these weird lizard people, yeah, you might think they were kind of silly, well, we're going to basically do them as the xenomorph from Aliens or from the Alien franchise. They found a way to make them scary again, I guess, or make them scary for the first time, possibly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like we obviously spoke a little bit about kind of the this pre-title sequence, which feels kind of quite separate. But when I started watching it again and you know taking my notes, I was kind of like immediately drawn to one of my favorite things about Alien in particular is sort of this the crew feel and how they're watching them talking over breakfast and, disputes, etc., about finances and everything to go along with that. And, I think some of my highlights of the first season of Strange New Worlds has been these dinner kind of party scenes. And then this one, very similar to Alien, there's talk of someone's returning home, their next mission, etc. And it's being discussed over breakfast, very similar to Alien, as they discuss kind of going along to this planet that's going to be next on their mission stop. So there was almost just that immediate parallel and structure, a bit more of a family vibe on Strange New Worlds to what it was like on the Nostromo.
Well, it's interesting. Of course, in this story, it's set on the planet, on the crashed ship, the Peregrine. I guess, you could say maybe is one of the elements where it's borrowing from Aliens as much as from Alien. I don't know. But what they don't do is bring the alien onto the Enterprise. They don't bring the alien into the kind of domestic realm in the way that I think one of the reasons, I mean, there are many reasons why that scene in the original Alien is so shocking, with the chest burster. One of them is the fact that they're having this quite mundane dinner and they're all like joking around, and it's quite, do you know what I mean? It's like the mood is quite jokey and they're kind of teasing each other. And then in the midst of this sort of convivial scene, albeit a bit, snarky or whatever, something so horrific and random and out of nowhere seems to happen. And it's a weird one. I mean, that scene, it's a strange mixture, and I think this is true of other moments in Alien as well, which, as much as it's an absolute masterpiece and an amazing film, there's something about that scene, it's almost potentially comic. It's so kind of OTT and like out there and wild and unexpected and sort of I don't know, sort of, it's not that it's not set up, because it is set up on a kind of plot level, but it's like the moment the whole film kicks up into a different gear. I don't know, and then this tiny thing like scurrying across the floor. It's tricky. There's a scene in Red Dwarf where they kind of parody it and play it for laughs, I think. And it's almost, watching it's almost hard to get away from the kind of absurdity of it, as well as this kind of horror. And I think it's interesting for Star Trek, whatever, like, how old is Alien? 40 odd years old, I guess, 40 years later, to ape that so precisely, because it's hard to pull that off, I think, without it just seeming sort of grotesque and OTT somehow.
Yeah, and I think that's the joy of it. It is just, it's so violent and aggressive, isn't it? And we get a little bit of that here, where it's not just popping out or being birthed. It is like the most violent kind of image possible. And I think it's obviously everyone kind of probably all knows about it, but obviously it was kind of hinted at to the crew and the cast what was going to happen, but to the full extent of it wasn't really kind of shown until it really happened. And
in Alien, you mean?
That's right.
This was like the cold water in the shower in Psycho or whatever.
Yeah.
This is the director messing with his cast, right?
Yeah, they just the reactions were all kind of caught very genuine, probably a mixture of genuine reactions and probably like acting exercise at the same time of just respond to whatever you see out in front of you. And that probably almost explains the heightened element of it. If you're wanting to provoke a reaction out of a huge cast, you can't just have something just pop out. You've really got to make a splash and a bang.
That's very interesting. And of course, Star Trek ups the ante, because there are, 3-4 of them, I think, that come out one after the other. You've had one, you think, okay, we've done that. And then there's more of them coming out. Like, how many of these things can you keep inside one, admittedly quite large alien, I suppose? I guess he had room for a few of them in there. But it is interesting, I think, although it doesn't take place on the Enterprise, they don't bring it up to the ship. I guess that helps, because they can make it kind of moody and it's kind of darker on the planet and so on. It doesn't have to deal with, bright Starfleet. I mean, albeit it is obviously a Starfleet ship, which is suspiciously similar to a Constitution class. They say, oh yeah, they're made of the same parts. In other words, like, we can use all the same sets, but whatever. But it does mean that it can be a bit run down and crashed and kind of grungy and so on. So we don't have to deal with, putting that CGI in the kind of full light of day. But it is interesting. A lot of the locations I felt kind of echo the Alien franchise. And to some extent, I mean, maybe it's not surprising that there's, lots of scenes in sickbay, given that there are sick people or whatever. But there is something about, the fact that in the original Alien, it is in sickbay again, where it all kind of goes to hell to begin with. You know, they bring I can't think of the character's name. Anyway, they bring the guy with the face hugger stuck to his face in, and then they try and treat him, and there's all this sort of stuff going on there, and then it does the kind of scurrying around and all this freaky stuff. And we sort of get all of that here, where it's in the sick bay where Nurse Chapel is, you know, trying to do her thing, that it all, again, it sort of all kicks off. And suddenly, the other thing I think that strikes me is it's not till about halfway through the episode that this happens, and that very much reminds me of Alien. I mean, Alien is a glacially paced film for the first, like, probably half of it, I guess. You know, it's very absorbing, it's very engaging, but it takes its time. It happens very slowly. It's not like a kind of whiz-bang action movie where you kind of hit the ground running. And I feel like they must have deliberately done that here as well, to hold off on actually kind of getting to the you know, really scary thrill ride for quite a long time. It takes them, I think, about 25 minutes to get to that point. And even then, you know, I suppose in both stories you've got this shocking moment, and then it scurries away, and then when does it come back, and so on. And I think in Star Trek, you know, in 2022 or whatever, the CGI is advanced enough that they can just about pull it off. I mean, certainly compared to the CGI Gorn in Enterprise, which was awkward, I feel, at the time, and certainly looking back on it now. Obviously, with Alien 40 years ago, they had to really work around the fact that this is just a guy in a rubber suit, and it could potentially look kind of ridiculous. And they do that in a lot of quite brilliant ways. I mean, often you see a shadow. There's one brilliant shot where the focus is on the character in the foreground, so you're only seeing it, you know, blurred, basically out of focus. All these kind of tricks to avoid showing you too clearly what it's meant to be. You know, obviously it's very dark for a lot of the film. It's a very dark film generally. This one, the Strange New Worlds episode, you know, we do see it a bit more clearly, but again, it's very fast. It's often in and out very quickly. I feel like they kind of handle that quite well.
Even the parallels you can almost see with Alien even kind of begin with, like, your kind of landing party. You know, in the film, obviously we see Kane, who ends up being kind of taken over with it, and a couple of the other team. It's like this very inhospitable kind of planet, very grey, dreary.
There's a storm in both stories, isn't there? Very windy. Yeah.
All very much kind of same planet. And then almost this, instead of this engineer half donut ship, you kind of then have this sort of almost Constitution class style starship just sort of stranded on the planet, very kind of similar parallels. And it's just, you're just like, yeah, they are really hammering home some of the kind of Alien sort of imagery. But I think the one that really stood out for me, if you know, we did like a pass on it, and it's like, what are the connections that we draw with Alien? And it's like, it's that chest buster scene, it's the noise of these creatures escaping, the violence of it all, you know, it's not just the cannon fodder being killed off as well. But I took away from this would be sort of the Newt connection with Aliens, you know, exploring this ship, you know, it's desolate, where's all the crew gone? Yes, we know some are dead, and then we start to detect life signs, and the first person that we discover is this little girl. And then obviously I think we saw it in the kind of previous episode as well, where we had it where M'Baga kind of, he's dealing with the loss of his child, and then Ellen Ripley in the director's cut of Aliens has lost her child, but we don't really see that in the original cut, and then that sort of explains why she gets so close to Newt the character in this. And, you know, having just lost his daughter in the previous film, we sort of see that adoptive style kind of nature with this kid there, which felt like a very, very strong connection to Aliens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think although it was Alien that kind of struck me on the first watch of this, Aliens is definitely in there with the girl character, who, you know, she even looks quite a lot like Newt. I mean, they both have that kind of look. She looks like she's been sleeping rough. Do you know what I mean? They kind of dirtied her up, and I don't know, I feel like they're sort of shot in quite a similar way. And both films actually have a scene where she disappears from her bed, I think, and Ripley / Nurse Chapel is going looking for her. Ripley finds her under the bed, I think. I can't remember where Nurse Chapel finds her. But, you know, they even play the same beat of like, oh my God, has she been taken by the alien? No, she's actually just gone off and, you know, done her own thing. She knows. And she knows, you know, in both stories, it's the girl who knows how to survive, actually. I mean, in Aliens, I think the idea, she's hiding out in like she can crawl through all the little ducts and things, can't she? Which presumably the aliens can't fit through. And she's got this little sort of grungy little home that she's built in like maintenance shafts or whatever. In the Strange New Worlds episode, the girl has identified the coldest part of the ship that she can go to because the Gorn don't like the cold. Now, interestingly, in the Alien films, it's always fire that the aliens respond negatively to. So they use fire to kind of drive them. In Alien 3, for example, when they have to get the alien to a particular place so that they can kill it, it's, you know, setting off fires that they're using to kind of drive it along. In the Strange New World story, it's kind of the opposite. It's the cold. But again, it's like this idea of, I suppose because it's a lizard, it's cold-blooded, that means it can't regulate its body temperature. I don't know. I guess they're going for something like that therefore, you know, it wants to be, you think of like lizards like basking in the sun, right? So it wants to be somewhere warm. And so in the end, they don't burn it, they freeze it. Whereas a lot of the aliens in the Alien franchise end up getting burned. The Gorn in this one ends up getting sort of dry iced. And then in another moment that felt very familiar to me, having grown up with all those movies, it's, you know, it's like the climax of Demolition Man and probably a dozen other sort of 80s, 90s action movies. You know, the villain that gets dry iced and then smashed into 1,000 pieces. La'an gets this sort of cathartic moment of smashing it literally into nothing. Kind of what happens actually to the alien in Alien 3, because it they put it in the molten lead and then they drop water on it and then it just kind of explodes. So it's like it's not enough to just kill it. It has to be obliterated somehow for that kind of cathartic moment for the character who is this kind of survivor character. I mean, both La'an and Ripley, La'an in terms of the pre-story, you know, in terms of her backstory, this, which again sort of evokes Tasha Yar and this colony that had gone to hell and everything. In her case, she has this incredibly traumatic childhood. I mean, she's in Memento Mori, she says her memories have been trauma inhibited and she gets Spock to kind of unlock them with a mind meld. So this traumatized character at the beginning of Aliens, Ripley is very much this traumatized character. She's having nightmares. She doesn't know how to, you know, sort of deal with what she's been through. And I suppose in both there's this kind of, with the young girl that they encounter, there's this sense of they are the person to look after that fellow survivor. Do you know what I mean? Another trauma survivor, basically. And La'an at the end of the episode says she's going to take a leave of absence for who knows how long to go and make sure that this girl, you know, is kind of looked after adequately. Ripley obviously is, you know, unable to do that. Spoilers, thanks to the brutal opening of Alien 3, which kind of takes away. I mean, it's that is an interesting film, but just the way in which it takes the sort of happy ending of Aliens and then is just like, yeah, you're not having any of that, and makes it as grim and brutal and horrible as possible. It's quite a bold move. I don't think Star Trek's going to go that far, but it's interesting. They have this kind of similar background, I guess, with trauma, and then this similar bond with this little girl who's going through the same thing or has just been through the same thing that they have.
I think there's another little parallel, I think, that kind of when I was thinking about it on a kind of larger scale is sort of like what is kind of like the Star Trek movies that I think Alien came out post motion picture, and there's always that thing that people talk about with the motion picture. Or did it come out the same year? Let me get this loaded up here, because
I think Alien was I think they're both 79. Yeah, I think they might be the same year.
So they kind of, you get this both thing with the motion picture that, well, Alien and Aliens. Alien is the haunted house, and Aliens is the sort of war movie, like the horror slasher. And, you know, I was kind of thinking about, like, in a way, the motion picture was that movie. Like, V'ger, in a way, is this haunted house that they go into, and it's trying to get themselves out of it and free from it all. And then, you know, Wrath of Khan, obviously a couple of years between those two movies, longer for Aliens. They immediately sort of almost course correct. I don't think you can class it as a course correction for Aliens, but they sort of very much more lean into the kind of the action sides of things, the sensibilities perhaps of the action 80s and so on. And, you know, it's quite interesting kind of thinking about the two and sort of how they almost have synced up a little bit with history too.
Yeah, that is an interesting point. You know, where do these stories come from? And I guess the other, you know, big one was like Star Wars 2 years earlier, very different to either of those movies, and 2001. And I think Alien and the motion picture both lean quite heavily on 2001. I mean, Alien, it's very dark, except when it isn't. When it's bright and lit, and you've got the computer mother, who is very much a kind of HAL type, slightly sinister computer. Plus, you've got, the android Ash, who is really sinister in a kind of HAL-like way. I think there's a lot of influence there, but at the same time, the aesthetic mostly is very different. It's very dark and grungy because it's all gone to hell, and they can't maintain that kind of bright, sort of lit world for very long. And also, there's this thing of we're always, I suppose, in the Alien franchise, we're always, we're on a kind of crappy mining vessel, or we're with these Marines or whatever. We never get to see Earth. I mean, at the end of the fourth Alien movie, they're on the point of bringing the alien to Earth, and then we don't find out what happened. So we never get to see, what Earth is like in that time frame, or any of the, we don't get to see skyscrapers and cities and all that. We get a little bit of a space station, I think, in the start of Aliens, but it's always very much out there in the dark, in deep space, in some grungy, nasty place where there are always storms. I mean, Alien 3, that planet seems to have perpetual storms as well. These very inhospitable environments, I guess. And there is that sense, definitely the kind of haunted house is the sort of feel there. I mean, when you were talking about history, though, it struck me one thing, without wanting to get all political, this is a very odd moment to be talking about the Alien franchise. I mean, this is a franchise which is first of all about sexual violence in various ways, but also repeatedly has this kind of motif of a woman with, a being inside her that she wants to get rid of.
Prometheus probably being the biggest example of that.
The most blatant. But I feel like all of them, to be honest, I mean, Alien 3 does that just with a slightly different inflection, and these are films that are very much about like sexual assault, sexual agency, all these kind of themes. That, I'd say, is like the big element of the Alien franchise that Star Trek is not going to borrow to the extent that we don't get. I mean, I was thinking, with Alien, if it's a horror movie, slasher movie, whatever, Ripley is the final girl, and you've got that kind of totally gratuitous scene at the end where she takes most of her, she's like strips down to her underwear, and I was thinking, okay, well, at least Strange New Worlds is not doing this. They're not making La'an strip down to her underwear. And then I was thinking, well, if this had been the 90s and it was Rick Berman and this was an Enterprise episode, that is blatantly what would have happened. So, at least we've moved on from there. But I mean, I suppose what I think the defense of that scene, for some people who might defend it in the original Alien, is that it kind of fits with this theme that is there in the movie of sexual violence, and the alien is this very kind of male, large, strong male aggressor, and Ripley as this female character who is our protagonist throughout the movie and throughout the franchise. And so, in a way, that scene emphasises that. It emphasises, I suppose, her femininity and her vulnerability in that situation. So I think it's interesting, and that obviously is an aspect of the story that Star Trek is not going to touch with a barge pole, even in 2022.
Yeah, and you know what I would almost think of, like, this might even be an episode that you could really get something out of, but in terms of Prometheus, I think one of the biggest parallels that you can draw between that and Star Trek is the episode The Chase. The idea that, where have we come from, and sort of this urge to go and find out, like, who created sort of, human life throughout the universe. And, obviously in Prometheus it ends in a bit of a disaster and horror, but you kind of get that with the chase and that sort of journey, and even maybe a little bit more on the head, as well as like the final frontier of, like, there's an interesting kind of, it depends how well you dive into it. Some of it's kind of done all right in terms of the movie, in terms of explained, but like the Greek mythology stuff with Prometheus and the thing of, like, and the idea in Prometheus the movie is that they came to Earth and they created mankind, and for some reason these aliens want to come and destroy all mankind because they did something X, I can't remember the exact amount of time, years ago. And you're kind of like, oh, I wonder what that is. It's pretty much implied heavily, and it makes sense when you kind of know it in your head, is that humanity killed an engineer, and that engineer was Jesus Christ, and that the reason these godlike creatures are wanting to come and destroy Earth is because they killed an engineer, which was Jesus. And, you know, this journey to almost the center of the universe, and, you know, this ship kind of, you know, someone behind the scenes drawing things. You almost get that sort of Final Frontier reference about the search for God and mankind, and, you know, the origin of the world and so on. But yeah, I love that about Prometheus, is that it just takes such a huge swing with something like that. And we've often seen it a couple of times in Star Trek, you know, whether it's Sisko being a godlike creature, or the chase, you know, and implying that sort of humans weren't created on Earth, for example. Yeah, there's a lot there that I think Prometheus and Star Trek kind of crosses over with quite a bit.
That is an interesting one. I have to say, I've not seen Prometheus since, I mean, I saw it at the cinema when it came out, and I haven't seen the second of the newer ones, Covenant, at all. So I'm not as au fait with those. I mean, I did think when I first saw Prometheus, and I know lots of people have said in subsequent years they've grown to love it, so I think I will give it another go. But I did find all of that a bit baffling, because I sort of thought, this is not what I expect from an Alien movie. Do you know what I mean? We do. Normally, the Alien movie, it is quite... it's not sprawling. It's not huge in scope. It's actually quite a contained... They don't go to loads of different planets. That you're stuck in one place for 2 hours, pretty much, and terrible things happen. And at the end, you run away and go to sleep. So it's... I don't know, it's a strange one. But yeah, I think you're right. Obviously, those are kind of big sci-fi themes. And I think it's interesting that when Ridley Scott decided to go back to Alien, having done this quite inventive thing of handing each film over to these... I was going to say auteurs. I don't know if you call James Cameron an auteur, but he does write all his own films, doesn't he? So I suppose... And it is very much a James Cameron film, you know, rather than someone else's, I suppose. So they are, in a sense, you know, giving them to these very stylistically... sort of specific directors and letting them do their thing with that franchise, I think is a bold choice. And it's interesting, I suppose, when you think about the Star Trek movies, you know, do you give each one, do you give one to Tarantino and have him do a Tarantino Trek in the same way as you get a Cameron version of this story, and you get a Genet crazy European sort of artsy weird version with the fourth Alien movie, or do you try and go with a safe pair of hands who's going to kind of deliver something that looks similar to the last one? I don't know. I mean, I love that about the Alien movies, although I think they're, you know, the second two are not as good as the first two. I actually think there is quite a lot to enjoy about them. I didn't watch Alien Resurrection again this week, but I did watch the first three, and actually even Alien 3, which I had always kind of written off, has quite a lot going for it.
Yeah, it's if you can get past piece,
how,
isn't it?
How, yeah, exactly. If you can get past how just horrible it is. To be honest, it's better if you haven't just watched Aliens. I think that's the problem. If you're kind of binging away through them, it's like such a brutal approach to the continuity that it's kind of... I don't know, that sort of sets you off.
It depends how much you're willing to go along with it, isn't it? Where, you know, it is just so brutal, and you can easily sit there going, oh my God, we went through this journey in Aliens, you know, these characters survived, how lovely, and you hope for the best. But there's just something that appeals to you of like, it's that sicko mode style thing of like, Jesus Christ, can't this person catch a break and all that sort of stuff? And yeah, it's definitely brutal.
Actually, thinking about Alien 3, and you were talking about... you literally just said Jesus Christ, but you were talking about this idea of Jesus in the Prometheus story. Obviously, in Alien 3, there's a big element of this sort of Christ-like sacrifice. I mean, there are actually two scenes. I hadn't realised there are two scenes where Ripley stretches her arms out in a kind of crucifixion style, in the first case, inviting another character to kill her, and in the second case, killing herself. And this, of course, is one of the moments where... So as much as this Strange New Worlds episode leans on the original Alien, I think with the chestburster scene, you know, the ending is straight from Alien 3. I mean, Hemner just dropping off that cliff is very much the scene that we have in Alien 3, the way that Ripley dies. You know, in her case, she's going into a vat of molten lead or whatever. In his case, he's just going over a great height. But there is something quite... poetic about those moments, I suppose, and very powerful and quite shocking, you know, in terms of the Alien franchise, to kill off your central character. just like you killed off everyone else, you know. And for Star Trek to lose a main character and a very popular character, you know, who we'd only sort of just got to know, and I don't think he'll be back like what's his name in Lower Decks. They kind of did that with and then brought him back a few episodes later and refused to explain why. I think that's, I assume, it for Hemmer.
I was genuinely stunned.
It's a sad
by
one
that.
in a way. Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking, which it's meant to be, you know, because you don't expect that to happen. You kind of knew that those red shirts were going to not last very long when we're kind of introduced to them in the opening scene of the episode, and then, you know, things start going wrong. That's kind of taken for granted. But losing one of the core crew is a bit of a shock, yeah.
And I think what's kind of interesting about it is it makes this... It's weird talking about it now because I think there's been a couple of times that I think one of the drawbacks sometimes you get when you get access, woe is us, of when you can watch these episodes early, is like, I'm curious about the context behind that decision. And sometimes you get it where, whether it's on a Ready Room or something else, where something drops, an interview will drop in Variety, Hollywood Reporter, where Alex Kurtzman or the team or the actors talk about X decision, you know, there and there on the day. And I'm kind of like, why have they killed him off? Like, what was the reason behind that? Was it always going to be due to that? Was it due to, like, the actor's commitment that he could only do something? Like, I have no idea what the creative decision behind that was. I have to imagine there was a very specific reason, and it's been in the pipeline since the start. But, you know, obviously Tasha Yar was something, but I'm always reminded of the Buffy spin-off Angel, where they built in this character of Doyle, and their plan was always to kill him within like the first 8-9 episodes to sort of just highlight the threat that this world poses, that you may have your name in the title, but that doesn't mean you're going to be there for a full 7 seasons. And I think even as far back as, I think it was like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, very similar show, I think their plan was, let's include this character in the opening credits for the first episode, and then shock horror, we kill him off, which they didn't do, but they did ultimately. Spoilers for early 2000s show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. They killed off like this character Tara, and they introduced her into the credits really late on. She'd been like this special guest star for a bunch of seasons. In her first episode that she's in the titles, she's dead by the end of the episode. So it was such a unique way of like playing with the audience expectation and things like that. And I find I think there's maybe an element like that behind it, but I'm very disappointed that character's gone, especially the fact that it was one of the almost original characters with no ties to the kind of wider franchise or anything like that. It just feels like a shame to have killed that character off. I really enjoyed him.
Yeah, I did too. When you were talking about that situation with Angel, it made me think of Spooks. I mean, again, spoilers here for people who aren't up to date on their, like, whatever, early 2000s TV. But, you know, the second episode of Spooks, they kill off one of the main characters, having very much established her in the first episode and in that second episode as one of the core team. And then this was a death which was not just shocking, but like truly horrific. And the BBC got more complaints than they'd ever had in recorded history over this, you know, horrific decision. And I think it was very much intended to like shock the audience and to say, look, you know, this is not a kind of cozy drama. Nasty things are going to happen to people. Don't assume that anyone is safe. And frankly, you know, Spooks has quite a history of like working its way through its lead characters, and the majority of them do not leave in a nice sort of happily ever after way. You know, they tend to go out in a pretty nasty way, one way or another. But it is interesting, sort of Star Trek kind of moving towards that. I mean, I feel like with Discovery, there was that episode, wasn't there, where it looked like they were going to kill off Saru, and they pushed it quite far. And you're sort of thinking, no, of course they're not going to kill Saru, they're not going to kill Saru. But they kind of really dragged it out to like the last few minutes of the episode, I think, and then turned it around and like, oh no, he's fine. And in fact, he's, you know, Super Saru now. But there is this kind of thing, you know, that is part of what people expect from TV, I think, these days. And in a way, you might expect to see more of that in Star Trek. But I feel it does sort of go against, as much as they did it with Tasha Yar, I don't feel they ever really did it again. It kind of goes against what Star Trek, part of the Star Trek formula somehow, I think. I don't know. So it's a tricky one. I think it's a hard one for them to match up somehow. Yeah,
the closest they probably did was like Voyager to an extent, with Caretaker, of like, here's, you know, Kavitz, you know, and you meet like the doctor, you meet the commander, you meet the helms officer, and then
but none of them are in the credits, so no.
But I can imagine
paying attention then.
If they were in a certain world, they probably would have done that. And I think maybe Michelle Yeoh, in terms of like the opening pilot,
that's true. They did
obviously
do that,
it was. I'm sure they had it obviously in their head that they were going to bring her back in this, you know, mirror universe. But like that was very much kind of like big Hollywood star. You know, she's kind of in this special guest star. You know, I think obviously that was included in the credits as well. So they did kind of prime you to think, oh, they really did go kill her to an extent. It wasn't a shock, but it felt like they were kind of playing into something like that, I guess.
Absolutely, that is true. And I think that was quite effective, except that then you have this reaction, which maybe they want, of like, oh, I don't want that character to be gone. You know, we want a Prime Giorgio
Culber,
series, you know, find a way of bringing it. Yeah, exactly. We don't want Culber to be dead, you know, bring him back. And of course they did, which apparently they were always going to do anyway. I don't know. But
the amount that they had to bail that out afterwards made me kind of think like, they were like, yeah, we can kill him, but you know, we'll bring him back. It'll be a surprise in season 2. But I think the backlash with obviously the kill the gays sort of element to it really kind of either forced their hand, or I've never seen something so panicked from Star Trek behind the scenes in so long.
And it's partly because this is new Star Trek and it's trying to do stuff that Star Trek hasn't traditionally done. And it is borrowing, you know, they've got their lead actor from The Walking Dead, haven't they? Sonequa Martin Green. They are trying to borrow from some of these other popular shows of the time. And maybe managing that kind of balance is tricky. And I mean, Star Trek's always done different kinds of stories. You know, First Contact is basically a haunted house movie with the Borg, isn't it? You know, it's quite similar to Alien in that respect. But this is, I would say, you know, a bit nastier, a bit squelchier, a bit kind of more grim than Star Trek has gone before in doing these things generally. You know, they're pushing it. They're not pushing it like outrageously, but they're definitely pushing it a little bit. And especially for Strange New Worlds, which seems like such a sort of bright, cheery, kind of poppy kind of show. Do you know what I mean? Upbeat. It's very much in that kind of traditional mould of kind of fun, friendly Star Trek.
The whiplash you get from watching the previous episode, you know, all this like fairy tale to, you know, mass murder, death, killing regulars, and then even sort of characters, you know, exiting for perhaps a brief spell, etc. Yeah, it's definitely a whiplash feeling. And isn't that kind of what episodic TV should be, that you have the comedy hijinks episode, then you have the horror episode, and then, you know, when you kind of look back at the kind of this seasons before it, it's just been, you know, they've certainly, you can't pin one sort of genre or style with Strange New Worlds.
And I think that is one of the things I've really enjoyed about it. I mean, you know, for years people have been saying, oh, why can't Star Trek do episodic shows? Well, now they are, and, you know, it's great. I mean, some of them, you know, I did not particularly care for the comedy hijinks fairy tale episode, but you know, some people loved it. But you know, they can hit and miss, and even in a season of 10 there are maybe a few duds or a few that don't work out as well, but there are also some. I mean, like I say, this one and episode 4, Memento Mori, I think would be my 2 favourites. And interesting, they're both written by the same guy. They're both written by a guy called Davy Perez, who I did look up. I couldn't find out much about him, except that he's born on Halloween. He's born on Halloween, so obviously has a kind of, I don't know if that's given him a sort of dark, creepy sensibility. But I do think that thread has been a great one in season 1, and I hope we kind of see more of the Gorn. I don't know whether there's a canon issue. When they were saying no one's ever seen a Gorn, it's a long time since I've seen Arena. Is Kirk supposed to be the first person to see a Gorn? They've got this problem they have with the Romulans, that, you know, they want to use Romulans, but no one's supposed to have seen them. So, yeah, okay, that's a tricky one then, I guess. But I feel they worked around it quite well. I mean, we still haven't seen an adult Gorn, right? Because these Gorn are scurrying around on 4 legs, which, again, it seemed to me like an echo of Alien 3, because you've got the alien that is from a dog, not from a human, and then the alien comes out looking more like a sort of dog alien. These felt a bit like the kind of dog aliens. Are they on 4 legs because they're crawling, like they're baby Gorn? So they're like you know, not even toddlers. They're like, you know, infants crawling along the floor, but at high speed and with deadly, you know, jaws and claws and stuff. I mean, is that the idea, that at some point they would have grown up to become Gorn like we've seen in Arena, only hopefully a bit scarier.
I suppose it's probably hard if you've got like a little CGI model or something like that to kind of have it running uptight. It probably just looks like a little kind of, you know, those little tiny dinosaurs that you get, I think, like at the beginning of the Lost World, Jurassic Park, something like that. It probably just, it's probably easier to, yeah, that's it. It's probably easier to have something on all four to scamper around and perhaps to be a threat at that point. And maybe once they start to get kind of battle hardened, and because I think they talk about they fight each other, they become the alpha. I suppose there's an element of like being in that kind of arena, that pit where you probably almost have to stand upright, I guess.
And also in the bright light of the desert by the Vasquez rocks. It'll be a tricky one. I don't know, who knows? Well, maybe we'll see in season 2. It'll be interesting where they take what Davy Perez has next in store for La'an and the Gorn. Because I do think it's an interesting story, and I really like her as a character as well. I mean, we're talking about Hema being a great character. I think it's interesting, and everyone was very concerned with her that it was all going to be about, because she's got this Noonien-Singh surname, it's all going to be about genetic modification and so on. And I feel that seems so far to have been a bit of a weird red herring. All we've seen is that she's got strong opinions on that, and it's some ancient family history, but doesn't seem to be particularly relevant to her. What is relevant to her is this kind of traumatic backstory, to the extent that we see, even in this episode, she is late for the breakfast because she's seeing her head shrinker, as she calls it. She's seeing a counsellor, even though she's very resistant to the idea. I think it's interesting. I think it's an interesting character, and insofar as it does feel a little bit like Tasha Yar Mark II, I feel like they're handling it better, certainly, than they did.
I was very worried and concerned, that connection to Khan at the beginning. And for now, they seem to just not touch it outside of the name and that brief connection to sort of how we got from being on this ship fleeing Earth to where she is now. So, I can buy into that. I can accept that. So, I hope they continue to dodge it, because it's still something I just feel that just is unnecessary at this point.
She is also quite a Ripley-like character, I would say. I mean, she's sort of tough and no nonsense. She's very smart. I feel like both of them, they have this thing where they just kind of take charge and tell people what to do. And, Ripley, there's that great, have you seen that that joke about the guy who watched Alien with his wife, and he was saying, I've been a professional film critic for decades, and this is my wife's review of Alien. And it's something like, smart lady tells everyone what to do, they ignore her, they all get killed, smart lady and her cat fly away. That's basically the gist of it, because it is, she is the only one who's ever making sense. It's a great lockdown movie as well. She's got this line, if we break quarantine we could all die. She's the one who is by the book, who's doing the right thing, who is in every situation is making the right call, and she's always surrounded by these idiots who do really stupid things. And I don't know, maybe that's one reason we love Ripley as a character. I mean, she is an absolute icon, isn't she? And La'an, I think, with the makeup and everything, everyone thought she was going for like the Karina Drummer from The Expanse thing. Another amazing kind of, badass female character from recent years. But I think with this one, leaning into this kind of Ripley mould also just gives her even more heft, I suppose, as a character. I mean, if you think of her compared to, someone like Harry Kim in Voyager, or Mayweather in Enterprise, these kind of quite bland characters, she's got a lot going for her already, even just, 10 episodes in.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that a lot of people are taking away. As I say, there's definitely been a little bit more up and down in the past kind of five episodes of the season, but you come away, as you said, like, if you had 26 episode, you wouldn't feel so bothered about kind of those ratios. Even Deep Space Nine, its absolute peak, had those kind of clunkers, and that's okay. And especially the first season as well. I think the ultimate thing that you come away from this, whether it's the talent, the characters, the stories, that it's an exciting place to be going into a second season. And with the arrival of Kirk, I'm certainly interested to see where they go in season 2. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, that's an interesting one. Obviously, in this story, we didn't get James Kirk. We do get Sam Kirk coming back again, though, and playing a little bit. I was thinking, watching Aliens, playing a bit the Bill Paxton role of the guy who is like freaking out constantly, and not as tough as you sort of expect him to be. And again, I think those characters are sort of there to emphasise the kind of Ripley or the La'an or whoever being cool-headed, not panicking, being quite on top of everything. I mean, in all the Alien movies, actually, to be honest, everyone else freaks out apart from Ripley, who is like quite on it. And she has moments of, kind of breakdown and enormous distress and so on. But generally speaking, she is very much someone who keeps her head. She's she would be a great Starfleet officer, wouldn't she? She would be, you'd want her leading your away team because, she's kind of not going to lose it at the crucial moment like some of them do.
Yeah, and just I think Ripley, the fact that she has gone on to be just this iconic kind of character, and I can't imagine her in the Starfleet world. I think she'd definitely rage against the machine quite a bit, but yeah, I think she'd make such a great captain, maybe a commander, and so on. And yeah, she's definitely iconic.
That would be a good bit of dream casting for some future Trek project. There's been all this talk about like who's the villain in season 3 of Picard, or who's going to be in the next JJ Trek movie. Yeah, Sigourney Weaver would definitely be at the top of a lot of people's lists, I think. For either of those.
We just need to get her out of her 6-movie contract to deal with Avatar.
That is true. James Cameron has a lot to answer for there. Just thinking about Cameron in particular, and the way that he sort of with Aliens reinvented Alien in his own mold, in his own style, in his own image to some extent. I mean, it did strike me, like I said, there were other films that this episode reminded me of. You mentioned when we were talking about it before, The Thing, obviously with the kind of icy, the icy planet and the cold. The fact that cold is so important to the story, it kind of emphasises that. I got even like Jurassic Park vibes off the Gorn. Some of the weird noises they were making. They make this really freaky noise.
Yeah, the raptor style
and you've got,
noise.
It's the kind of exactly. And then you've got the spitter, and they even talk about it how the way the spit, which is actually impregnating Hemmer, is also designed to blind someone. They say, which is exactly what that freaky. I don't know what its like proper name is, but the dinosaur in Jurassic Park that eviscerates Dennis Nedry is they call it the spitter, don't they? And it is a really horrifying. I think it's one of the scariest dinosaurs in that movie. Weirdly, even though it's quite small, just because of that trick that it has, I suppose, and the scary thing that it does with its like neck frills or whatever. So yeah, I definitely got some kind of Jurassic Park vibes there. Predator, obviously, in the visual, when we see from the Gorn's perspective, it's basically the Predator's like heat vision, isn't it? So that was an interesting one, which I guess that was the first one that made me think, oh, actually, this is borrowing from more than one. Well, I suppose they are. Are they the same franchise? I know Predator and the Aliens.
Yes, they are the same franchise. Yeah, there's the crossover movies as well. Yeah, in Predator 2, you see an alien skull there. So yeah, they are the same universe. Yeah,
and I think Lance Henriksen was in a.
He was in
one of the Predator movies.
He was in Alien versus Predator.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I think I've only seen. Maybe I've seen the first Predator. I can't remember. I don't know why. I was never as into Predator as I was into the Alien movies, but yeah. The
first Predator is good. The second one, not good. Alien versus Predator, not good. Alien versus Predator Requiem, one of the worst movies of all time.
Okay. And the new Predator coming out soon, right? There's a new...
Yeah, I think it's coming to Hulu in America. Disney, it'll probably be on Disney Plus here as well, yeah, which will be interesting to see that kind of dropping on a streaming service. You kind of associate these movies with being big screen experiences. So, yeah, I think it's set back in kind of the early times or on Earth, maybe. I've tried to avoid the trailer. I want to be a bit surprised with this one. But I think it's about a predator hunting in sort of like the dawn of mankind or something.
Well, Predator, obviously, Trek has done before, because there was that Voyager episode, Nemesis, is it called? Which is kind of like a sort of Vietnam-style thing, but they like very much look like a rip-off. I was going to say like a poor man's Predator. They're not even that poor man's Predator. They're quite scary, but like very much evoking that look.
Yeah, they do it quite well, because they tie in with the idea that you're meant to think they're the evil villain creature, but actually they're the goodies, which was quite a nice little neat turn and so on. And it kind of highlights how maybe pop culture even prejudices audience members. Yeah,
absolutely. I think by copying, for want of a better word, that makeup, they exactly, it's not just that they look scary. I mean, you could say like the Nausicaans look scary in a sort of similar way, but by specifically looking scary like a movie monster that lots of people have been scared by in the past, they very much tap into that sort of unconscious association, I suppose. And maybe that's true here as well, is that by tapping into, most people watching this episode will have seen Alien and been horrified and freaked out and scared by Alien. And by tapping into that, you're kind of resurrecting those those nightmares, basically, that kind of stuff in your unconscious that is you're playing on it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it's different, I think, from sometimes when we talk about these, a movie or a book or something that has inspired the writers, and then you watch the episode, and most people watch the episode without even being aware of that. I feel like in this case they have decided to make it quite explicit, with the chestburster in particular, so that you can't miss it. And I think that's an interesting choice, because the danger obviously is that people are like, yeah, well, it's not as good as Alien, or do you know what I mean? Like, if you're kind of pinning your you're making it clear who you're copying your work from, and you're copying from a master,
you better not miss.
Exactly, yeah. And there was that show, I don't know if you saw, there was this show on Netflix a couple of years ago called Another Life, which I quite liked. No one else seemed to like it, and it got cancelled after 2 seasons. But that was with Katie Sackhoff from Battlestar Galactica, and they did basically an Alien episode where it went full on. Everything went to hell, and and this alien-like creature was killing everyone, and so on. And I thought that was quite a bold choice, to be doing a sci-fi show and then to just say, right, we're literally just kind of, we're veering so much into this one. It's not even a genre that you're veering into. It's like a specific story, effectively, that you're kind of riffing on. It's quite a bold choice, and it's potentially a risky choice. And I know a lot of people, that show, people who had been kind of just about going along with it, they lost them at that point, because they were like, oh, for goodness sake, this is ridiculous. I thought this was its own show, and now it's just doing Alien. But I don't know, for me, it worked. I think those beats work. Those moments work, I mean, maybe you are cribbing from the best, but if you're taking the right stuff, it's a bit like, when we did an episode looking at First Contact. First Contact borrows lots of stuff from all those films, Jaws, Close Encounters, Alien, whatever, but it does it very effectively, and all those moments are highlights of the movie,
Yeah, it just depends how you do it, and I think with this, it's still its own unique story. It's interesting kind of characters. It's, the bit that's going to get people talking really afterwards, and probably the reactions is that ending, which is its own bold and brave choice. But, you think of, as you mentioned earlier, Macrocosm, it leans so heavily into the alien imagery, and it's probably one of the most popular Voyager episodes. And it's, if Star Trek, after all these hundreds of episodes, isn't ripping off from itself, it's drawing inspiration from other people and sources and literature and works of art and so on. So it's come at it if you've got something new and unique to say. And, I think ultimately you can't come away from this episode and not think, that was a really enjoyable hour of television. And yeah, they certainly took a big swing with it, with what they're doing. And I can't wait to see the reactions online come Thursday morning.
I'm kind of curious as well. Where do you think La'an is going next? Because obviously, without... I have to be quite careful here not to give any spoilers for episode 10, but we don't know when she comes back from this trip that she takes at the end of episode 9. And I was quite struck just thinking about Ripley and her journey throughout the Alien movies. There's this idea that they talked about in Discovery at some point of post-traumatic growth, that, you don't necessarily just... okay, so there's PTSD and post-traumatic, problems and nightmares and all the terrible stuff. But also this idea that sometimes people... And I think it's a bit dangerous to talk about it as this, like, alternative, because obviously... a lot of people are traumatized and don't get to grow or whatever. But it does feel like with Ripley, there's that element of, her she grows as a character, she grows in confidence, she becomes more iconic with every film in some ways, to the point where in the fourth one she's half alien and she's like this, I don't know what you describe. She's sort of more than human somehow. I don't know. Where do we think La'an is going with this? These repeated.
She'll
Gorn
be back
encounters.
in the 2 episodes time. It'll be similar to Saru, where he's off to this planet, he's off on his mission, then he kind of comes back and so on. So yeah, I don't think she's going to be away long, because they've kind of removed a couple of the characters really already by the end of this episode, and one suspects Uhura might take a little bit while to come back, because it feels like her departure or where she's going is sort of going to be a bit more of a kind of long return. She's got her next assignment, whereas this, she is a member of the crew and is due to come back. So hopefully, I don't think it'll be too long, and I'm sure the 2nd or 3rd episode of season 2 will be dedicated to what she's been up to and her story and her return back to the crew. Maybe
she'll bring that girl back with her. I mean, I was thinking that would actually be quite an interesting, because she's quite a young character to be the head of security or whatever, as it is. Why not have her also bringing up a teenage girl or whatever? I don't know. I feel like in a way it's a shame to get rid of that character. That could add like a
crash
whole...
on a planet.
They'll crash on a planet and she'll die off screen, right?
That's
what happens. She'll come back in season 2 and she'll say, "Oh yeah, it was awful. The girl died horrifically." Then we'll have some flashbacks, kind of Death of Icheb style, to when she had to perform a horrendous autopsy, and then she'll come back on the ship and reveal that she too has been infected and she has to kill herself now in some brutal, miserable way, after begging Mbenga, Pike and half the crew to do it for her. Yeah,
bring on Cheery season 2.
No, hopefully that is not the direction they're going with in season 2 of Strange New Worlds. But that's what it's like, watching Aliens and then watching Alien 3. That is what it's that's the kind of left turn that you get there, isn't it? It's like, all this kind of slightly schmaltzy, not schmaltzy, but this kind of like, you've got a little bit of romance, you've got this kind of family dynamic, all this kind of nice stuff that we've managed to introduce into this franchise. It was just there to like be torn apart and traumatise you all over again. Yeah,
it's an interesting way. I think we all thought we've had trauma in Picard, we've had trauma in Discovery. Strange New Worlds would be the kind of the soothing balm to all of that. Nope, we've got trauma. Trauma makes its way in there too.
Maybe that's one reason why she is one of the sort of standout characters, is that she's got a more sort of DS9-y backstory somehow than a Strange New Worldsy backstory in some ways. Although a lot of people on Strange New Worlds have a secret. I mean, Pike's kind of got this secret about his future. Una's got this secret about her identity. So there is, I feel like Hema I loved as a character. I just enjoyed his sort of attitude, I suppose. I feel like they've done quite well with balancing that, but I think you could be right. It did feel a little bit like they're clearing the decks, maybe because they do have new characters coming in. We probably can't talk too much about that at the present moment, but people are aware from social media and so on to some extent of new characters coming in. And I know with Picard, with season 2, they very deliberately got rid of quite a lot of the main cast in order to make room for the next gen cast for season 3.
There's the Homer Simpson thing where he becomes like the coach, and he's like, it's the hardest part of any coach's duty, and that's the cuts, and he goes, your cut, your cut, your cut, your cut, and it felt like very much the similar like that at the end of this episode, and but more so in Picard. I have a sneaky feeling we're going to see Uhura again, and hopefully La'an too.
I'm sure we are. Yeah, I'm sure we will. Though maybe not, as you say, maybe not in episode 1 of season 2. I don't know. Maybe it'll take them a little while to circle back again. But that does seem to be. I mean, when you were saying, what are the reasons for this? It does feel like Star Trek these days. There's a lot more coming and going, even with these short seasons. I don't really understand it. Tilly was off, and then in the last couple of seasons of Discovery, there was one of the bridge crew, I can't even remember his name, who left, and then they brought another guy on, and and they had the 2 different actors playing the same, both playing Arium and then swapping. I don't know, it feels like there's some kind of whole HR manoeuvring going on in these Trek shows that is a bit of a mystery to us. But I'm sure you're right. I think they will both be back, and we'll see who else. They're going to need a new engineer, so that's going to be interesting to see who that might turn out to be.
Yes, and wait and see.
Well, it's a pleasure, as always, chatting to you, Lee. Before we go, do you want to let our listeners know where they can find you online and what else you've been up to and where they can hear your dulcet tones?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Star Trek VHS and at Lee Hutchison _. And yeah, on my own podcast, Filibuster and the A24 Project.
You're blended, all right.